Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining into this session. This one's on mentorship and sponsorship, and I think it really does nicely fit in with this discussion that started off the day and the kinds of conversations we were having about roles and the differences. So we introduced ourselves, and just neither one of us have a conflict of interest, but our declaration, particularly I do have a director role at St. Joe's Health System in their international outreach program. I am a committee member on OTAC as well as a board member on Age Well. I'll let Dina do.
And I'm part of the CTS and of the Canadian Physiotherapy Association.
Great. Learning objectives for today is we hope that you will have the information around the differences in the continuum of mentorship to advocate. We hope we can tease out some of the ways that you can influence that continuum and then reflect on the commitment that you're taking away to advance either your role or someone else's. So a great quote, I think, that said it for sure to me when I saw this, and I think when Dina and I had the conversation around this session, it really is, sponsorship is really around surrounding yourself with women who would mention your name in a room full of opportunities. And I think that is so key. It really touches on what we heard this morning about elevating each other and trying to make sure that we provide the opportunities that that will help people advance in their leadership journeys. And I think what we'll share is a little bit of the difference and then some of what the literature has said about it. So I'm going to hand it over to Dina.
So we just thought we'd put a definition up, and this is a definition I've used in a publication. So mentorship, relationship focused on the sharing of knowledge and perspective between experienced mentor and motivated mentee. So it does need to have a mentor who has some experience and someone who's motivated to promote professional development and self-actualization. And I always think about my mentor as someone who opens the door. So someone who opens the door for you so you can walk through the door. And on the next slide, I know in academia, when I ask individuals, who is your mentor? It's sometimes a graduate supervisor. So they'll say it's my PhD supervisor or my master's supervisor. And I just wanted to put a bit of a distinction between them. A graduate supervisor could be a mentor, but it is a different relationship. So graduate supervisor, usually the relationship is driven by supervisor. It's around the task. It's time limited, and they're there to tell you what went wrong. Whereas a mentorship should be driven by the learner, and usually it's a bit longer term, although it doesn't have to be. If it's a bad mentorship relationship, you don't need to stay in it. And it's more focused on the progress rather than the task at hand. So in terms of saying to students, yeah, graduate supervisor could be your mentor, but you also need to look beyond your graduate supervision for mentors. So I'll just turn it back to Rebecca, who's going to distinguish between mentorship and sponsorship.
Great, thank you. So this information comes from an August 2019 Harvard Business Review article called "The Lack of Sponsorship Keeping Women from Advancing into Leadership." And it was an article that I found last summer, and I think it was pretty key because what it did for me in that aha moment, and I think we heard in our earlier group, it made the distinction between mentor and sponsor. And when you look at this, sponsorship is not an either or. It's a spectrum and it's a continuum, and there are very different kinds of degrees of support. And I think we all have had mentorship roles. Either we've been mentored or we are a mentor, providing advice and coaching. And many of us, agree to do that as part of our role in learning. There's also that person who is that strategizer. The person who understands whatever you're trying to triangulate better than you and can help you strategize on how to get ahead based on that. And I think often you might see that, as from a career perspective, as someone strategizing you how to get a job, how to get a leadership role. Connector is someone who makes introduction to influential people, and again, we've all played that role, and most people are happy to have that introduction. And of course, LinkedIn has been a great way to be a connector and even to self-connect yourself. Opportunity giver. I think, provide a high visibility opportunity for someone. And then an advocate is publicly advocate a promotion or fight for someone in a setting where they can't fight for themselves. And I think that's a key role too, because I think often people need to be called out on some of those barriers. And sometimes that's in a much more private environment where people can realize that some of those barriers do exist. So we'll speak about a few of them. But what was interesting in the findings of that paper were a few things that I thought made a lot of sense. So line versus staff roles. So a line role tends to be a role where you have a larger budget, or you have human resource reports reporting to you. And generally, because that's an operating role, it has high visibility with the C-suite. So those kinds of roles typically have the more visibility, and more men are likely to be in those roles. And historically, I think it's been because they've been able to commit to some of the, I guess, obligations of some of those roles. I remember thinking early in my career, somebody said to me, you want to make sure that you have in your portfolio something with line responsibilities, because at the end of the day, somebody has to turn off the lights, and it will be that person who will be left standing. However, staff roles are those opportunities where you get to influence, where you get to create policy. And they're often areas where women have a lot of competency. And so, one of the, I guess, the takeaways is maybe about how are we making sure that women are just as visible in line roles as they are in staff roles. The second one was women have fewer interactions with senior leaders outside of their direct management. And I think there's some truth to that. I think there are more COVID's been an interesting one because nobody's had any interaction with anybody. But in the past, there were more traditional things that you could have that outside connection with. And, sports was one, golfing was one. It's fun to have a conversation with women about who really want to golf and how many people love it and are they able to devote the time. From my perspective, I could never devote the time to being good at it or being able to keep it up. So you don't get that same face time. Women are over-mentored and under-sponsored, and I think that goes to our earlier conversation. I think we are over-mentored, and I think that we've all sort of agreed that probably is an under-sponsorship. And the sponsor should be the most powerful person you know, and who at your work. And I would say, for the most part, more women. The last point is more women are mentored by men, and they make more money and get more promotions and better career options. And it's not because men are better sponsors. It's because more men are in positions to be able to offer those opportunities. And so again, one of the findings, I think, is really that women have to be able to elevate themselves into those roles. And then as soon as they get there, they need to be able to look broadly at how they elevate other people. So in terms of, just from an observation point of view, what are the ways that you can do that in an organization? And this is really, it's critical for women, but it really is for women or for men in junior roles. And we talked about it in the earlier session around, somebody had a great example of how you can help somebody with just creating their resume and their CV. Getting people to the tables where decisions are made, where they can have that visibility with senior people, where they can be able to listen to the conversations and start to learn the strategy that exists at those tables. Getting people to those tables is important, and allowing and finding those opportunities for people who you do sponsor is key. The other one is titles. Position power means a lot. And if you look in the private sector, you'll often find that there are lots of people with bigger titles. And it's because the private sector's realized that position power is essential for making those connections. And we often say, well, they could be a coordinator or a project leader, or instead of really trying to make sure that we promote those titles, it's a really inexpensive way to help somebody build their career. And of course, always the women's issue that people talk about is equality in salary. And I think in healthcare, there may be some of that, but I think for the most part, it's so women dominated and compensation's been controlled in many environments with unionized and or compensation packages that are more public. I have never felt that total comp has been a limiting factor, but I do think as you make those steps within your career, we have to allow and promote for people to get the money for the job that they're doing, and not so much how little you think you can get them for. We are so tight for budget. Sometimes we think about, how little can we get someone for, instead of thinking about, how that will promote them in their sponsorship of their own careers.